everyone. Thank you for coming this morning to our this conversation with Center for Women's Justice at the beautiful Albright Club. Not only is this our 5th annual conversation where we host our the main recipient of our grants from the previous cycle, but it is our first that we're doing in person. So we're really looking forward to engagement with you in this conversation, something we haven't been able to have in the past. So we're thrilled to have Center for Women's Justice here. As you know, we voted for them amongst our finalists to receive our £150,000 unrestricted grant that we're going to have a 3-year relationship with you, because that's the term in which it's being paid over. So we've learned a lot about what Center for Women's Justice does, both in our due diligence process at that grant meeting and since, but we're really looking forward to today where we'll dive into all the more deeper understanding, and over the next few years through both of our newsletters and opportunities for you to meet them directly, we look for other ways where we can help them in their mission. So a lot of you are members, some of you are new today, so I just thought I would just quickly give you the lead words on Impact 100 London. So as you know, we are a collective philanthropy, so at our essence, a group of individuals, those of us in the room today, so who all contribute at least £1,000 to a pot. And through our own pro bono work of our members, we identify charities, we do the due diligence, and then we collectively vote to give a group of finalists, 3 who all receive a grant, unrestricted funding. And then so much more, because our time, our talent, and everything else that we have to offer. We officially launched in March 2020, and so with 315 individuals, we've collectively given £900,000 to 18 charities, all of which are really phenomenal partners of ours, and we hope to continue this going forward.
That's a round of applause.
Yeah. Our 6th grant cycle, which will culminate in our members voting in June. I think it's going to be the 14th or 15th, yes, that week of June, where we will again be awarding grants to 3 finalists. But the other interesting thing is it's technically our 5th birthday in the spring. So even though it's our 6th cycle, we will be having our 5th birthday in the spring, so we hope to have something to celebrate there, and all of you to be able to join us.
So great. So I'm Erica Wax. I'm one of the co-founders with Lainey, and one of our objectives is to maintain close ties with our grantees. So not only providing them with a platform to enable our members to gain a deeper understanding, deeper knowledge, and also to amplify their message to a broader audience. We're so proud to be supporting Center for Women's Justice for the next 3 years, and there are a lot of reasons why we chose them to be one of our finalists in 2024. But the one that really sticks out to me is their ambition. Instead of focusing on the symptoms of violence against women and girls, the organization aims to change the system itself so that women and girls are properly protected and that perpetrators are effectively held accountable. So it's the only charity in the sector that brings its own legal cases and has successfully achieved important changes in law, policy, and practice. We expect the discussion today to run for about 45 minutes, followed by a few closing remarks from Olivia Gillen-Bauer, right here. Olivia covered the Center for Women's Justice during our due diligence and continues to be the relationship manager over the next 3 years of our partnership. With that, I'm very pleased to introduce Edie Lush.
Good morning.
Who will introduce the guests. Hello.
Hello.
And Edie is one of our stellar founding members. She's an award-winning journalist, moderator, and communications trainer. Not only has she been super engaged with impact over the last 5 years, moderating events like this for us, but has also donated her time to run workshops, communications boot camps for our grantees, so training them on how to communicate more effectively with their various stakeholders. So thank you, Edie.
Great, thank you very much. Well, lovely to be here. How is everybody? Okay, a little bit more Monday morning. How are you? All right, okay, we're gonna get going. We have two folks who have a little bit of a croaky voice. We do have a microphone, if that's helpful.
See how we go.
So we see how we go. Great, okay. Can I ask, before I introduce our fantastic speakers to you, how many of you guys feel like you have a strong legal knowledge? Okay, a couple. So we're going to be, all right, we've got questions coming right there. I know who to come to for questions, right? And who has a strong knowledge around kind of violence against women and girls? Okay, some other folks we might come to for questions. That's my invitation to you to be listening hard to what these folks say, because I'm going to ask a few questions, but this is really about you guys getting to know the charity, Center for Women's Justice, and in particular Harriet and Debaleena. So welcome. I'll give you a very short introduction. Harriet Wistrich, English solicitor, founder and director of the Center for Women's Justice, 25 years of legal experience, many awards, including from Liberty, the Law Society Gazette, amongst others, and she has also authored a book called Sister-in-Law, Fighting for Justice in a System Designed by Men. And as I woke up this morning to the sound of It's a Man's World, I'm afraid that was Trump's last. We won't go into that. Anyway, we're also delighted to have here Debaleena Dasgupta. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Okay, good. Extensive experience representing survivors of sexual violence who have been failed by the state, and we're going to hear about some of the cases that you guys have worked on in particular. She's also worked at Liberty, worked in private practice before that. In fact, what I love about CWJ, we're not going to have too many jargony words, but we will shorten it to CWJ. Everybody got that? Center for Women's Justice. Is this idea around strategic litigation. So really being very specific and picking the cases that are going to make a difference and cause systemic change, which, as we know, is incredibly hard to do. So let's get started. And it's going to be up to you guys. If you cannot hear, you're going to raise your hand, okay? And I'll be looking for you out there in the darkness. Tell us, first of all, Harriet, why did you found CWJ in 2016? Ooh.
Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for your interest and for coming this morning and for supporting CWJ. It's been invaluable to have this opportunity and to have some sort of core funding that enables us to be flexible about the way we develop our work. I worked for many years, a couple of decades in legal aid practice. In fact, Debaleena and I crossed paths more than once, didn't we? We both worked for a firm called Bernberg Pierce, which undertook legal aid work mainly, and I was always the area of work that I did was primarily around holding the police accountable. So we used to call it actions against police. Although I came into law through campaigning around women who kill their violent partners, and then taking on cases around that. And my interest was always very much around women's rights and around challenging the state around violence against women and girls. And as I became more confident as a lawyer, I saw opportunities to use the sort of very specialist area of work I was involved in to actually start challenging the police, not just about the over-policing and unlawful and excessive use of force and so forth, but also about the way that they were constantly failing women around violence against women, around things like rape and domestic violence and so on, and to potentially use cases to do that. There were very few lawyers who were doing that sort of work, and yet it quickly became apparent that there was this sort of giant untapped need, and actually those working on the ground didn't necessarily see that they had legal rights, and that there was the opportunity to actually, you know, if they were let down by the police, that actually sometimes there might be a legal remedy to that. And so it seemed to me that there needed to be a kind of focus around that area of work, and also because often there wasn't legal aid or funding for that, and therefore that if we could create a charity that could do this sort of work, that maybe we could start to change, you know, to develop in a sense a discipline around it, and to also find new ways of holding the state accountable other than, you know, protesting outside wherever or trying to go and change policies but internally. So it's that's where it evolved from. There were a few other people like Debaleena and others who were doing that work, and we kind of came together and then established a charity in 2016.
Okay, so Debaleena, tell me, because you didn't originally focus on this part of law, tell me why you decided to focus on women's rights.
Okay, let me know if you can't hear me, and I'll grab the microphone. Like Harriet, I was in private practice and I was doing actions against the police. And my focus to start with really, I was very particularly interested in the over-policing in terms of race. And then I was a trainee solicitor, but I was about to qualify, and I got a phone call from the mother of a 15-year-old girl who'd been raped. And she called me to say that they'd just been to court for the trial, and only at court did they find out that the police had lost the only independent evidence in the case, which proved that her rapist was lying. They didn't tell the 15-year-old, they didn't tell her mother. This poor girl went to trial, gave evidence, and obviously he was found not guilty. And at the end of that trial, the judge did mention that things might have been very different if the police had kept or had correctly secured that evidence. When I got that phone call, at that time, there was no legal duty on the police to properly investigate rape. In fact, it doesn't exist for most things. But it felt so awful to not do anything that I spoke to my boss and I said, look, can we at least put in a police complaint and see where we get to? So we did, because it's obviously an awful situation, and we thought that was worth trying. And the investigation in that eventually established that in that borough, the police, the police chiefs had moved all of the detectives out of rape and into car crime, because car crime is easier to detect, and so they could hit their statistics better in the number of cases that they detected if they were focused on car crime. So my clients, the officers investigating my client's case were unqualified, they were unsupervised, they were PCs, they did not know what they were doing. Frankly, it was not possible for them to have secured the evidence that they ought to have secured, because they had no idea how to do that. And that really changed things, because at that point, so I got that report and I thought, we've still got to do something with it, this can't be the end. And I had read, actually, through a completely different case, that there had been a case in Bulgaria in which the European Court had decided that there was potentially a legal duty on the state to investigate rape under the Human Rights Act, well, the European Convention on Human Rights. And I ended up phoning, I think probably 14 different barristers and saying, look, I've had this idea. I know it's not been argued in the UK yet, but I wonder. And 13 of them said no. And then one of them said, well, maybe. And I think she'd actually spoken to Harriet, who had done a similar sort of thing in relation to a young boy who had his ear bitten off, is that right? Or, I can't remember the timing, but there was something around that. So we tried, so we issued what is called an Article 3 claim, which is actually the foundation of a lot of the work that we now do at Centre for Women's Justice. And around the same time, Harriet was approached by 2 victims of John Warboys. And if you don't know who he was the black cab rapist. He sexually assaulted or raped, it is estimated, over 100 women in London, and he hadn't been caught due to general police failings. And so, while in different firms, Harriet and I started talking, because nobody else was doing this, and the barrister started acting in relation to both of these clients. And about halfway through that case, a job came up at Burnberg Pierce, which Harriet was talking about, and so I moved over there. And that's how we started working together. And to be honest, that was the turning point for me. And then it took 10 years of us making those arguments around those clients. And then in 2018, the Supreme Court decided, 2018, the Supreme Court decided that yes, there is a legal duty on the police to properly investigate rape, but it was 10 years of work on behalf of these incredible clients, and it felt like that, you know, we had to take that forward.
One of the extraordinary things is how long some of these cases take. That must be frustrating, or is that just part of the job?
I think you can't ever quite predict what's going to happen with a case. Talking about the case that Debaleena has just mentioned.
Tell us about that. Tell us about the John Warboys case.
Yeah, would it be helpful just to say a little bit more about the background of
Sure.
what that case
Please.
was about? So, this was a taxi driver who drove a black cab in London in the early 2000s, and he evolved this modus operandi where he would wait outside nightclubs, you know, for girls to come out on if they were on their own particularly, and he'd pick one up, and then he'd come up with a story which said, I've just won the lottery, and would you have a little drink to celebrate with me? And mostly women would say, well, no, it's fine, but he was quite, you know, he was quite, got one, you know, please, you know, that kind of very, very kind of like, please. So women would sort of say, like, you know, they take a sip. Anyway, in this drink, he had laced a whole load of drugs, in which rendered many women unconscious. He would then rape or sexually assault them, drop them off home. They'd wake up the next day with virtually no memory, but thinking, what the hell happened? Sometimes they would realise they'd been sexually assaulted, didn't know what to do. Should they report to the police or not? And you know, would they just be laughed at because, you know, they'd taken a drink from somebody? Maybe they'd had a few drinks before they'd taken the drink. Would anyone believe them? And so many women didn't, but some women did, because, you know, they knew exactly what had happened, and they thought, this man's really dangerous. So eventually he is known to have attacked well over 100 women during a 6-year period. Eventually, the police, when these women reported to the police often didn't really believe them. They might take the first initial steps, but then they would say, well, you know, a taxi driver wouldn't do that. They'd do a blood test, and there wouldn't be any date rape drugs in there, although there was other drugs in there. He hadn't used a date rape drug. And they would just say, well, this case isn't going anywhere, and, you know, maybe something happened, but I don't think you were raped or something. Anyway, it was only after about 10 cases were reported that a police officer, I think they were doing a dip sampling exercise, and they saw this pattern. So somebody spotted the pattern and said, hang on a minute, you know, and actually we'd arrested him on one occasion, but just let him go again. And so that he was eventually caught, he was eventually prosecuted and sent to prison. But 2 of the women who had reported him were so, I mean, they were obviously very, very devastated by the thing that had happened to him, that he'd done to them. But they were actually even more devastated by the way that the police had failed, and about their feeling that it left them almost, you know, although this isn't really logical, it's quite a common thing that we find with many victims of rape, is that they feel almost like, well, if the police had only believed me, then all these other women wouldn't have been victims, and of course it was the police's fault, but they carried that terrible weight around with them. I remember one of the women who was one of the early victims, when they eventually caught him, and she was invited to go to an identity parade to see if she could to identify him, and she came into this room and she just saw like loads of women there all waiting to identify him, and she just felt absolutely sick, because she just thought, you know, if the police had believed me, then anyway. So both these women came to me and said, look, is there anything we can do to hold the police accountable, because he's been put to prison, okay, but what about the police? And so like Debaleena, you know, I also looked into there is what is you know, many people say is really a wrong aspect of the law, negligence, which is, you know, when an authority fails, you think, well, if they were negligent, if they didn't do their job properly, they should be held accountable in law. But the law has been tested again and again around negligence, and the courts have always come back and said there is no duty of care that the police owe to victims who they don't know. You know, they just that duty doesn't exist. And so it looked like you couldn't bring a case, except that we had recently passed the Human Rights Act, and this was the route. So Debaleena mentions the Bulgarian case, which is a European Convention case, which had established that there was a duty to investigate in circumstances where it was a duty to protect women from rape. So the state had a duty, and that duty we went on to argue all the way to the Supreme Court in the end, was also to ensure that that not only did you have laws to protect women, not only did you operate those laws properly, but that operation would extend to individual investigations. So that was the basis of this legal challenge. Now, at the time these two women came to see me, I thought the police had really bad press about this. There'd been what was the IPCC, the Independent Police Complaints Commission, as it then was, had done a fairly damning report of the police and their failures in the investigation. I thought this will be straightforward. The women were not eligible financially for legal aid, so we had to look at was there a way of bringing the case without legal aid, and the only way, unless you've got loads and loads of money, which most women don't, is what's called a conditional fee agreement, or a no-win, no-fee agreement. So you do all the work, and if you if you win, you can recover costs, but if you don't win, then you've done all that work for free. But that was the thing. So I spoke to Philippa, who also advised on Debaleena's case. And she said, yeah, let's give it a go. It seems like one. And I thought the police will settle this case. So with civil proceedings, often the police sort of say, they've been shown up. The easiest way to get rid of the case is to pay some money. And I thought, we'll probably resolve this. But they, for reasons only known to themselves, they decided to fight it. And I think they decided to fight it on principle. But it was just one of those things that almost falls into your lap, because by fighting a case which is good on the facts, as this was from our point of view, and then managing to take it not just to the first court, but then to the Court of Appeal and then the Supreme Court, because the police kept appealing the decision. Whilst it took 10 years to get there, we now have in law a duty to investigate. And that means...
I think it's worth mentioning, actually. So one of the things that's really interesting about that case, and actually all the cases that we do, is when you get that, straight after the case, they went to the Commissioner of Police, the sort of London Commissioner, saying, what's your response here? And he said, well, we're going to have to reorganise our departments so to make sure that we put more resources into investigating rape, because now they have this legal duty. So it wasn't just our clients, it's now every single woman, and they won't even know necessarily that they're affected by this case, because they should be getting slightly better, I mean obviously they're still very poor, but they should be getting slightly better investigations just as a result of that case. And that's a thing that I think is really extraordinary, and that doesn't happen very often when you do civil claims, and why it's worth doing things which are risky, and why, in fact, you know, we as a charity take on a lot of those cases. They're very 50-50. Sometimes you're going to do all of that work and you're not going to win and you're not going to get paid. But when you do, it's not just about getting the money in to help other clients later. It's actually, you've changed everything. A sort of fundamental change has been created at its root, which means that women who haven't come to us are still helped.
And even in circumstances where you might lose at the end. So we did another big case, so set up Centre for Women's Justice. This is another case where we found that the Crown Prosecution Service are not prosecuting rape enough. They keep throwing these cases out, even in circumstances where the cases are quite
For
strong.
different reasons.
Well,
Same kind of reason.
it's quite complicated,
Right.
but they basically had sort of introduced a new test, which basically was moving away from looking at all the evidence, but just thinking, well, what are the chances of success in this case? Which is not a lawful test. We argue this is not lawful to do what we call the bookies test, which is it more than 50% chance
Right.
of success. We'll take it forward. That's not how you're supposed to do it. You have to anyway. So that was the basis of that case. But we did do a big judicial review challenge, and we raised a lot of money through crowd justice. So we went out and because there was such concern, because this was like 2018, 2017, 2018, 2019, the rape prosecution statistics had collapsed. I mean, they were really, really bad. And there was a huge concern, public concern around it. And so a lot of people, you know, kind of tried to support it. Now the support you need isn't to pay us, it's to pay the organisation. So we worked in conjunction with another women's organisation called End Violence Against Women Coalition, but to stop them being liable if they lose to pay costs to the winning party, because that's how our costs regime works. So we brought this judicial review, and it was a very big publicity. There was a lot of interest in it. Ultimately, the case went to the Court of Appeal and we lost it, really disappointingly. But what we've done by doing this case and by putting it out there in the public domain and by getting all this support was actually it caused a lot of embarrassment for the Crown Prosecution Service. It put a lot of pressure on them. And ultimately, as we were moving along, they did change their policy, and they did get rid of this particular approach that they brought in. So in a way, we won that case, even though we lost that case. And I think that's something, a message we want to provide to you as supporters of CWJ, is that we could afford, as a legal charity, to do a huge amount of work to bring that case, and we had support. And although we ultimately didn't bring in any money, and in fact, the End Violence Against Women Coalition had to pay money to the Crown Prosecution Service.
How much?
70 grand, I think it
Wow.
was. A lot of money that, you know, people had paid £10 each, you know, to support our crowd justice appeal, which was pretty awful. But, you know, we still, in a sense, won that case.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, obviously we can't do many of those cases because there was a huge amount of resourcing, but it shows that, you know, sometimes strategic litigation isn't necessarily just about winning a case. It's about how you fight that case and how you go out there and how you work with other organisations. You know, we work closely with End Violence Against Women Coalition, we work closely with Rape Crisis and other organisations, and there was this whole and the other thing is that women who are you know, the ones that had, you know, their cases had been dropped, or women who were going through the process, and I mean, it's so important to feel like there's somebody out there fighting for you, and that even if you don't bring your rapist to justice, the fact that people
Somebody
are
believes
noticing
you,
it,
it's on your side.
is
It's
really,
about
really
being part of the
important.
movement for a lot of them. I thought the donations that we had, because you could see comments from the women who donated, and they would say things like, my rapist was never brought to justice, I don't have very much money, I'm on benefits, but here's £5.
Wow.
And that was an extraordinary feeling. And it felt, we feel the weight of that, about, sort of working on behalf of this movement, and that's what it is. And it's really important to note that, as we've said, Harriet and I worked in private practice. There are almost no, if any, private practices that would let you bring those sorts of cases. Whereas we can do things differently, and we can focus our resources not just on the legal work that we do, but also doing the press. We do a lot of press between us to make people understand that there is a movement, to reach out to other organisations, lots of frontline organisations, which all then forms part of this. It's about doing law differently, but still doing law.
I want to focus on one of the cases that you've been involved in, the Devon and Cornwall Police. Before we do that, spend just a minute describing what Article 3 is and why it's important, because it was a little bit of legal jargon, but we all want to learn something here and be able to say something, I learned about that. So tell us about that. Why is that important?
I'm going to try and do it in a non-lawyerly way as far as I can. Does everyone know what the European Convention on Human Rights is? There's lots of nods, so I'm just going to take the nods as the general consensus. So one of the articles in that is Article 3, which is that essentially that the state is not allowed to it's a prevention from torture, inhuman and degrading treatment. Now that is a duty which says that the state can't do that to an individual. But what we have done is we've argued that it's not just a negative here. It's not just that you're not allowed to do it. It's also that the state has a positive duty to protect women from that sort of behaviour, even if it's from a private citizen. So, and we say, and the courts have accepted, that a lot of areas around violence against women, but particular rape, would fall within that category if it was committed by the state, and therefore they have a positive duty to try to prevent that. And that is the reason that we are able to say, if you don't have a system in place that properly investigates rape, if you don't in fact properly investigate rape, that is a breach of Article 3. And therefore, the state has a duty to set up a system that does enable proper investigations, but also to conduct those investigations properly. And where they don't, women are able to bring claims. Although, I should say, most people don't bring claims, but it can be that if they're doing it badly, we will sometimes write what's called a pre-action letter. So we'll write to the police or the CPS and say, you are failing in this duty by your current failure in this investigation. And they will sometimes back down and then they'll reinvestigate. So we've actually had a number of successes where we haven't gone to court, but we've written that letter saying, relying on Article 3, where they have then picked up, investigated properly, and I can't remember the last count, but there are at least sort of 10 or 15 people who've been prosecuted and found guilty who would never have been in prison, who would never have been caught and could have been out there attacking other women as a result.
Just to add that in the year 2000 we incorporated the European Convention of Human Rights into our own laws via the Human Rights Act. And the Human Rights Act, as you know, has been a subject of controversy. The Conservative government have talked about repealing it, and we've fought very hard around that. And actually, interestingly, whilst the focus from those that want to repeal it is often, oh well, you're letting prisoners vote or something like that, which was a particularly unpopular case, or you're allowing a person to stay in the country because of their relationship with a cat, which was another not true, but kind of popular myth or whatever. But that sort of populist sort of thing against human rights. But what we were able to do, we kind of came together with lots of organisations that were concerned about the abolition of the Human Rights Act was also to say, but these sorts of cases, when we're talking about preventing violence against women, are ones that have quite a popular cause, and most people, you know, on the whole, think rape is a bad thing, and that you know, we should have, you know, the police should be doing their job. So it also enabled us to sort of put forward, you know, the arguments about kind of the importance of preserving what is a really important piece of litigation that actually it plays a huge role in protecting women, you know, and so to be part of that wider voice as well through examples from our legal casework.
So let's spend a moment talking about the case in Devon and Cornwall, where police were allegedly protecting officers accused of abusing 7 women. So talk about that case and what it has meant as well for women and girls.
Okay, so I think this is actually a really interesting case in terms of showing the different things that we do at CWJ. So CWJ is right. So I'm gonna try and sort of simplify this because this is weirdly complicated. About 6 years ago, new legislation was brought in to allow certain organisations to bring what's called a super complaint against the police. Now, you can, as an individual, you can put in a complaint about a police officer. But what you couldn't do was draw together issues where they were repeating themselves and put that forward to be investigated as a whole. And the government decided that there would be, I think it was the Home Office, decided that there would be a few organisations which would be allowed to bring these because they were able to draw on lots of experience. And CWJ was one of those. So we applied and we were granted status as a designated body, it's what it's called. And around that time, we had a number of people come to us talking about how when they were victims of domestic abuse by police officers, the police were failing to investigate those properly. This is known as police perpetrated domestic abuse. I'm sorry if I slip into an acronym, but it's PPDA. I'm going to say it so many times.
Perpetrated domestic abuse.
Police perpetrated domestic abuse.
Got it.
So originally, in fact I wasn't the CW at the time, but I'd been doing a super complaint in a different organisation. But originally there were about 19 women.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about
We
the
can talk
super
about
complaint, but
And then with that super complaint, they put in this Centre for Women's Justice put this in, showing, as I say, that this was something which was causing significant harm to the public interest. That is the test. It's a very high test. It takes a lot of work to be able to demonstrate that some sort of failure is causing significant harm to the public interest. But they did, and they put it in, and then it was investigated. Once that was published, we were then flooded with calls from women who were victims of police officers. And I can't remember the
that
last...
increased exponentially when we had the story about Sarah Everard, who was murdered by a serving police officer, and then we had this whole sort of ream of stories, particularly around the Met Police, but it was across the country, of police officers doing terrible things. And suddenly, although we had seen this before, there was this sort of
Public outcry
about police officers who were actually the criminals, and we were able to speak out about that. So we're also, as a legal charity, we can sort of enter the public domain a little bit more than most lawyers will on wider issues, because journalists will come to us, and we thought it was really important to speak out about it, so we did. And that also, of course, the downside of it in some ways was that we kept getting flooded with all these women saying, this has happened to me, please help me, and so on. So
we ended up, I think, in the end, it was, I can't remember the exact figure, but between 200 and 300 women around the country contacted us to say that they were victims of police violence, and that they had tried, most of them had either tried to report it or decided not to report it, because the way the system works is that it's their own force that investigates. There is nothing that sends that out to another force. So sometimes these officers were being investigated by their friends and their colleagues. And with this huge amount of data, we're pretty sure we are the only organisation that has this much information about it. we brought in a consultant who's a barrister that we previously worked with, who went through some of these accounts, and we realised that one force in particular, which was Devon and Cornwall Police, were really failing, and we'd had lots of calls from that particular force and lots of very similar issues. Now, I talked earlier about Article 3, about individual investigations failing, and one of the things that we realised was that none of those cases on their own necessarily was enough to meet that Article 3 threshold, because the threshold is so high to meet. But when you looked at it together, suddenly you were like, no, this is a system problem. There is no way that you could have the same failings in all of these cases unless the system is incapable of properly investigating. So what we did was we brought these women together. They didn't know each other. They contacted us individually. These are not friends. All of them were abused by different police officers. Some of them are still serving police officers. One of them, and this is really extraordinary, one of them is actually the head of stalking and harassment in his particular police force, despite the fact that his victim was also a senior police officer. And what was really notable is that a lot of people who come to us are police officers. About 45% of the victims of police perpetrated domestic abuse are police officers. So that shows you something, doesn't it? 2 police officers talk to the force. One says, my husband is abusing me. That's a woman. The husband says, I didn't do it, he's a man. Why do they always seem to prefer the man? And I think we all know why. But it was very, very frustrating. So yes, so we've brought these together, and what we're now doing is we're bringing a case arguing that there is a systemic failure in Devon and Cornwall Police in terms of investigating police perpetrated domestic abuse. So we went to the press because the women understand that what they want to do is bring change. And this is another thing to really understand. Human Rights Act cases do not result in a lot of compensation. The average, I believe, the last time I looked at it, was somewhere between £5,000 and £15,000. This is not money. This is, I don't want this to happen to anyone else. Things have to change. And that's really clear, actually, particularly in the police officers who left their forces because they lost faith entirely in what they were doing. So yeah, so we are trying to argue that there is a systemic failure in Devon and Cornwall Police to act. We went to the press, there was a big outcry, and then we got more people calling us. So I now have in fact, the last few weeks, I've been talking to more women who are in Devon and Cornwall, and I'm about to add more women to this case, which shows you how much of a problem this system is. And what we really hope, and what all of the women have asked for, is not particularly compensation, but to get round the table and to say, Devon and Cornwall, this is what you need to do to change. This is how you should be investigating this better. And on a bit of very good timing in that case, when I sent that letter of claim in, I didn't know this at the time, but it landed on their desk at the same time that they were being inspected by HMI CFRS, which is the sort of inspection body for police services. And apparently they got into a lot of trouble. And they haven't told me this, but I've heard, because we have little birds now, people who support our work in police forces, and I understand that they've set up an operation to investigate all of the way that they're doing this. So we do think change will come, whether we win the case or not.
Amazing. Right, it's your turn. Who has a question for Harriet and Debaleena? You don't have to be a lawyer or a specialist in domestic abuse. Yes, and just tell us your name.
Hi, my name is Eva Merchant-Marling. Thank you so much. I'm quite interested in societal responses to legislative changes and that kind of awareness amongst people about the law. I was in Spain last week and they were talking about change in law in Spain, where the onus for domestic violence or violence against women cases has changed to guilty until proven innocent, and the conversation being from men feeling like victims, there's a lot of kind of emotion around that change, which from my perspective I was like, about time. But how do we, those kinds of, how do people respond, how are you seeing people respond to, from an empowered perspective or from a disempowerment perspective, within society to legislative and these types of cases, in terms of behaviour change or attitudinal change?
It's a very good question. I think legislative change can be very important, and it can assist, but ultimately things won't change if attitudes don't change at the same time. And I think one of the issues, I guess, for CWJ is that often the laws are there, but they're not being implemented effectively, or even when they are being implemented, they're not getting, say, juries coming back with the right, where a case goes to a jury. So it has to be in partnership with work on all sorts of different levels in order to achieve that change. And there will be backlashes, where suddenly, men have been getting away with a certain type of crime, and then suddenly they're not. Yeah. Then there's going to be a pushback or finding a different way to, like say there's a new frontier around online crime, for example, which so we have to be. Unfortunately, it's a never-ending kind of task, isn't it? I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, just I think it's really interesting, and I also honestly don't know the answer. What I would say is that we absolutely do have. I mean, we sometimes get these, sort of responses when we put things out there, usually from men saying, "But men are victims too," and we have to deal with that a lot. The sort of women are getting more, women are getting more, but I think that actually, sort of, if you are, as Harriet says, if you've always been getting away with something, or rather you've always had a particular position, as men have for, since time immemorial, losing that level of power is going to feel like you're losing something, even though it's actually just creating equality. And I think we just have to deal with that. And, I can't remember a time I've done a talk where someone didn't say, "But what about the men?" And my answer is, I don't really care. No, it's not at all really. Actually, one of the things that's really important to know is that these changes that we bring in terms of Article 3 claims also help men and boys who are raped, and I have used it in relation to that.
Absolutely.
And I'm very happy to turn the question around. In some ways, it's not necessarily just about violence against women and girls. It is about violence perpetrated by men, and that's usually my answer when I get asked that question.
And we see more, there are more men, I think, coming forward who recognise the scale of the problem, who will campaign around it and support women. So, there are voices out there, and I think there are some men who recognise that it's a duty on them, and it's not like, well, what are you going to do about us men? Actually, the men have to get out there and do that as well.
Right, what other questions? Yes, just there and then here.
Hi, my name's Sophie Hussey, and my question is about funding. And you touched on fundraising and that wonderful campaign where you were receiving £5 gifts. For full disclosure, I'm the fundraising director of the Women's Prize Trust that runs the Prize for Fiction and the Prize for Non-Fiction. So another women's charity, and know that only 2% of funding goes to women's charities. And I hope it's a pertinent point to make in this environment. So do you find it difficult fundraising? Do you rely mostly on a lot of smaller gifts, or just interested in how you get your funding?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at our sort of funding pie, if you like, at the moment it's around about 70-75% is from foundations and trusts. And there are a few foundations and trusts that are interested in our area of work. I think the challenge we're faced as we go forward is that they don't want to kind of necessarily keep funding us year on year on year. And we've kind of gone to most of those that exist.
The wells have been tapped.
The wells have been tapped. So that is a source which has given us a good buffer to build the organisation and to get ourselves on the map. But we're looking to increase the other parts of the pie, if you like, and that another part is sort of donations, and that we're working on in terms of increasing. So as well as the individuals who put in a £5 or whatever, we also are very keen to meet more well-connected people who philanthropists and so on, and who might wish to put a bit more money in. We do sometimes just get approached. We're approached by the odd guy who made a bit of money on the hedge funds, and he says, I'll drop you 10 grand if you like. And it's sort of like, yeah. So we're kind of trying to operate in that way. But in addition, we are able to generate fee income, and through our litigation, and the big challenge for us, and one we're constantly engaging in, is that potentially that could cover everything, because most legal practices survive just through fee income, just through the money they get on litigation. We're not going to charge women for the work we do, but as we were describing earlier, if you win a case, you get paid, and you can be paid on a reasonable commercial type of rate. But we don't want to, because we're a charity, because we're interested in strategic litigation, because we're interested in bringing cases that are difficult. We don't want to sort of substitute that for bringing cases that we know we can bring money in. But we need to sort of have a little bit of a balance. So that's something we're tussling with a bit, in terms of trying to think about that as another source of income. So it's a mixed economy, I would argue, and it will be. There are other possibilities, but those are the main areas. Yeah.
Just here, yeah.
Hi, my name's Olivia Kerfer. My question was actually very similar about the funding, but so I'll try and think of another question. But about the charity itself, if you could speak a bit about, like, how many are you? I was thinking, are they all? I'm assuming you're mostly lawyers, full-time, part-time, mostly women. And then also, if you could touch a little bit about the funding that you're getting from Impact, what you envisage that's going to help you with.
Do you want to answer?
I'll do a little bit, and then you can do the finances. So we're all women, because most of our clients, all of our clients are women, and often they will be very traumatised. Most of my clients have some form of complex PTSD, and that when they're calling the office, etc., that doesn't matter to them, because they struggle otherwise. It's an amazing team. We are mostly lawyers from a private practice background. Actions against the police is the sort of background that we all have, and it's a very small area. So years ago, I was the sort of co-chair of the Police Action Lawyers Group, and there are only 100 of us in the whole country. So, and so that's the background. But we don't just do law. So I'm in the litigation team. I'm the joint head of the strategic litigation team. But we also have another team that goes out and does both training and assisting frontline women's organisations. So the women who are out there working with victims of rape and domestic violence, if their clients come to them and say something and they think, well, maybe there's something legal here, they can go to our inquiries team, who will give them some legal advice, or sometimes sort of draft a few letters on their behalf. That is also lawyers, but again, it's not like a legal case, and that obviously has to be funded separately. I mean, I think that's the thing that we need to emphasise, is that although we're mostly lawyers, we don't do law in the same way, as I said earlier, and that's one of the reasons that funding can sometimes be tricky. And one of our other aims, sorry, Harriet, I'm sure will talk to you about what we're doing with Impact 100 money, but one of our aims as an organisation is to create what's called future feminist lawyers. So we have junior lawyers who, I think I'm technically responsible for the sort of overall training of them. But we're not going to keep on everybody who comes to us as a trainee lawyer or as a paralegal, but what we want to do is instill in them the ideas that we bring, the approach to litigation, which is so different, so that when they go out into private practice, they will carry on with what we are taking to them. And that spreads that sort of feminist lawyering, as it were, throughout the industry over time. And I put a lot of time into that, and that obviously takes away time that I can spend doing legal work. But I think it's just as important, but to be honest, very hard to fundraise for.
Yeah. I don't know if you want me to add any more about the different areas of work we do.
Just
or
briefly, because
just
we're
the-
probably running
But
out of time, but what's most important, do you think?
Well, I mean, the beauty of the Impact 100 work is that we're not it's not sort of tied into any one sort of piece of project. It allows us the flexibility to evolve and develop, and we are quite a nimble. Although we've grown quite a bit, we're now about 16 members of staff. Most, not all full time, but also quite a few on 4 days a week. But we are still able to sort of respond in a flexible way, and we're not kind of tied that this is the department, this is what we do. And it means we also can respond to issues that arise. So like with the police perpetrated abuse, because that suddenly became such a big issue, we kind of wanted to focus work in that way. So that gives us a flexibility. But the other thing that is very, very valuable is that it enables us to invest a bit more in our staff. So we do well-being. We've offered staff because obviously working around these issues is quite traumatizing.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure everyone is well, and can has a space to deal with that. And we also want to try and offer at least a sort of basic kind of benefits that those that work in other sectors will assume is their right, and just to try and pay people enough to live in London, which is
really tough.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I'm the official timekeeper. My time says we're up. Are you going to jump in with a final question?
Oh, can I just,
As the co-founder, we'll allow you.
Okay. No, I know that the new government announced some, Raneem's Law, and some other pilot programs, I think, in September. And so I just want sort of your quick thoughts on that and sort of what else needs to be done. I know the Domestic Abuse Commissioner talks a lot about data collection.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing.
There's a huge kind of raft of things that they need to do really, but they have announced this incredibly ambitious target of halving violence against women and girls over a decade. I don't know quite why they set the bar so high, but we can hold them to account for that. Raneem's Law is a tiny, is a little tiny thing that Raneem was a woman who'd been murdered by her partner, and it was a case I had some involvement in, and actually that involved putting domestic violence experts into 999 call rooms, which was one of the things that went horribly wrong in that case. But that we actually, one of the beauties of the Centre for Women's Justice is that because of the range of work we do and because of the work we do across England and Wales with frontline organisations that do work around supporting survivors, is that we kind of are able to start seeing what the things that still need to change, whether they're in policy or in law. And that means that we have, although we never kind of quite started out to be an organisation that was in policy, it does mean that we can play a role because we've got this incredibly rich evidence base of cases that say, this is what needs to happen. You've got these powers, the police have these powers to protect women from domestic violence, but they're not using them. And so what we need is an enforceable power, and that means holding the police officers accountable. So we can go to the court, we can go in the work that we've done around police perpetrating domestic abuse. We can say, look, the police officers who are victims don't have the same protections as civilian women because of the way the Police Reform Act works. This is outrageous, and we need to reform this bit of the Police Reform Act. So we can come in with very discrete pieces of law, like around non-fatal strangulation, which was a piece of law we helped bring in because we saw that men were not being prosecuted for non-fatal strangulation. They were just sort of leaving it out, and actually having a law now has changed things around that practice. So
I just want to add one more thing, which is that we didn't set out to be a policy organisation, but we are now consulted by everybody, really, because And I noticed this, so I previously worked at Liberty and I occasionally had to attend a sort of policy meeting, but everyone always listened to me because I was the lawyer in the room. And in truth, no matter how qualified and brilliant those policy people were who were in the room, they wanted to hear from the person who could say, actually what you're doing is unlawful. And we have found that that's put us in really good stead in terms of being heard. So Harriet's always too modest to mention this, but she is, of course, you know, I would say the greatest feminist lawyer of our generation. And
Let's take it.
She absolutely. And as a result, we get calls from MPs saying, what should we do about this? We get calls from the government. So when the new government came in, we have already had a series of meetings set up with secretaries of state and policy people in different departments, and they're saying to us, what should we do? And we have a raft of things that we think that they should do, and we know that they will listen to us. You know, they might not do it, but they will listen to us and they will take that into account, and we really hope to make change that way.
Fascinating. Listen, I'm the timekeeper, so I've got to hold us to account, and Olivia's giving me daggers. So a couple of words that I heard, a couple of phrases: making a difference, doing law in a different way, partnerships with frontline workers, creating future feminist lawyers, bringing change, actual real change in law and policy, and systemic change in creating a more equal world. So it's not just a man's world, and frankly not just a women's world either, but really a world that is more fair, equal, and just for everyone, for all of us here. So thank you to Harriet and Debaleena, and thank you from me. Back over to Olivia.
Thank you very much.
So for those of you who haven't met me, I'm Olivia Gillen-Bauer, and I've been a member of the grants team for a few years, and I've been lucky enough to have been following Centre for Women's Justice for the last year, which has been a real privilege, I have to say. And I hope you enjoyed and learnt as much as I did in the last 45 minutes. You did such a brilliant job, both of you, I think, of demystifying a lot of terms that we've heard, from something as simple as strategic litigation to police perpetrated domestic abuse, Article 3, super complaints. There's a lot of jargon in this world, but I certainly feel a lot more educated having listened to that session, so thank you. But also, I think telling us a bit more than they could in their 5-minute video in June about the depth of the work that they do, the time that it takes to achieve change, the risks that are taken with a sort of no-win, no-fee arrangement, but also what a difference one case can bring, even if you lose it. And that the women who will benefit from that don't even know, because things have been changed, rape cases have been investigated, prosecuted, etc. And you won't even know the change that you've actually achieved. But we're all benefiting for it. So thank you, both of you. I'm in awe of the work that you do. I'm in awe of you both personally. I think it's amazing, and it's a real privilege to have had you in the room. So thank you. And thank you, Edie. Skillful, poised, elegant as ever. But thank you for also helping us, navigate what could have been something quite technical and difficult for us. So thank you. That was really, really brilliant. So you will be also hearing a lot more about Centre for Women's Justice in the next few years, because they're a 3-year grant winner. And thank you for all of you for engaging in it and being so interested and passionate in the work that Centre for Women's Justice does. There's a few things that you can do more. One thing I would recommend is Harriet's book. She'll be too modest to talk about it. Sister-in-Law, Fighting for Justice in a System Designed by Men. But if you're interested in hearing more about the detail of some of the cases that Harriet and her team have been doing, I can recommend it. I've just started it myself, and it is really well written and easy read. But it's easy. It's not a dry technical book, and it's brilliant at bringing these stories to life. I would also recommend you sort of follow Centre for Women's Justice on social media, join their mailing list, etc., so you can hear more about what they're doing. We'll follow up in an email about some of the things you can do to get involved. But I really hope that from this session, you feel you understand more about the work they do and things that you can do to help the cause, because this is not just about a few women, this is about all of us and our daughters and our sisters, etc. Thank you. I will hand over to Lainey and Erica to say the last few words.
So thank you again. That was wonderful. Thank you all for being here today, and great thanks to Albright for hosting us in this beautiful space. we hope to be doing that again in the spring, and so hopefully many of you will make it for that too.
Yeah, and then I just wanted to mention we have a fantastic event coming up this Saturday afternoon. It's a self-defense workshop that's going to be run by one of our former grantees called Action Break Silence, and it's kind of one of those things, we a bunch of us took it last time. It's one of those things that you always say that you want to do and sort of never get around to it, so now is your chance. Saturday afternoon, it's in Notting Hill, and it's a great way just to learn new skills, but then also learn more about what Action Break Silence does as well. If
You can bring children too, right, up to after 16-year-olds
16
and above
plus, yeah,
too,
15,
so.
16-year-old, yeah, plus. So that, please see EFROT if you'd like to sign up for that.
Right
EFROT's
here in
right
front.
there.
Behind the camera.
Yeah, and so with that, just thank you so much for coming this morning, and we'll see you soon.
And if anyone who is not a member wants to have a discussion about membership, Anila is here in the back of the room, head of membership, so we obviously, the more the merrier, and the important mission that we have, so join us, please.
Great,
Excellent.
well done.
Okay.
There is still breakfast in